Hey guys, Peter here to do an album review. Today I'm here to tell you about the debut record from Inhuman Architects Paradoxus of July 16th on Vicious Instinct Records. This album has 10 tracks, 43 minutes in length, and they are a Portuguese deathcore band. Now, this album offers some variety, some versatility within itself, not from a soundscape perspective. From a soundscape perspective, this album is very balanced, very cohesive from top to bottom. There's not a lot of variety there. But as far as the individual song constructions are concerned, and then obviously the impact that that has on the overall record, this really makes the album feel a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more versatile, a little bit more diverse. And the impact that it has is that it allows you to listen to the album from top to bottom, bottom to top, on shuffle. It doesn't really matter how you press play or where you press play or the order in which you listen to the tracks. Nothing really gets lost. The essence of the album, the sound, the brutality, the drive that the record has stays intact regardless of how you experience the record itself. So it's an album that the focus was placed on the quality of the individual tracks, not necessarily on the quality of the collective. So it's an album that doesn't merge songs and hide some weaker tracks within certain stronger songs, allowing them to feel a little bit more interconnected and allowing the overall experience of the album to remain unchanged. That's not how they built this album. This is really about the strength of the 10 tracks. They all stand on their own, and then obviously the strength of the 10 tracks impacts the overall strength of the album, but not the other way around. Once you get into the soundscape, it's definitely a traditional sounding deathcore album. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't have any elements that really jumps into the forefront that change your perception or that leaves you scratching your head on why were they there or what they were doing. So from a soundscape perspective, it's a very linear sounding album. What you get with the first track is pretty much what you're going to get all the way throughout. Obviously the elements staying the same, but changing in terms of how they come together, changing the formula, if you will, and then changing the song structure is what they did in order to keep the album moving, in order to keep the album engaging, and not allowing the sound to start to feel repetitive or mundane after a few tracks. But overall, it's a traditional sounding record, very linear, very substantial as far as the heaviness and aggression and brutality is concerned, but still very compact all around. Within that sound, you start to feel like there's some elements that become a little bit better refined with your perception of the album as you progress through the tracks. I felt like the drums, guitars, and bass had a role on this album, all of them having a different impact on your perception of the sound itself. For example, the bass. While the bass is not necessarily jumping into the forefront and demanding some attention throughout this record, there's definitely tracks where you could feel its presence, where you could feel its tone, and you can feel the darkness that is helping add to the overall atmosphere of the tracks. So while not being a motor, while not being a driving force of this record, the quality of the bass playing on this album is really outstanding, and it does a lot without necessarily being in your face. But if you're paying attention to the album, if you're paying attention to the sound, and if you're paying attention to the bass, you can definitely see the impact that it's having on the overall experience. Then you have the drums. The thing that I took from the drums is the sound. Sometimes it just felt like it had a lot of strength and it couldn't be contained. It felt a little bit chaotic at times, very diverse. It didn't have a pattern that you could follow. Perhaps the only pattern it had is the brutality, the heaviness that it gives on every single track. But outside of that, in terms of how it sounded to me, in terms of how it came across, it felt sometimes a little bit rough around the edges. It felt a little bit broken or chaotic. Like I said, it felt like it didn't have necessarily control, so it needed to be a little bit more refined. You can be brutal, you can be heavy, you can be aggressive, but you need to start to control all of those elements and how the sound comes across, because otherwise it's going to have a negative impact in the overall atmosphere and the overall soundscape of the record, because it starts to feel slightly grittier on the edges. Then you have the guitars. I love the melody, I love the drive, I love how they penetrate within the track, sometimes partnering up with the drums, becoming a little bit more chunky, offering a little bit more of a robust sound presence to the album, and other times becoming a little bit more driven, becoming a little bit more penetrating. This yin and yang that the guitars have throughout this record is really interesting, and it really adds life, it really adds essence and depth to the overall experience of this album. Another element that I felt like really added depth and really gave some life, a little bit of a heartbeat to this record, are the vocals. very dynamic. Not a one size fits all from top to bottom. I almost felt like they went more organic in terms of where the song was going, what was happening with the lyrical content, what was happening within the story of the song. The vocals tried to fit that narrative, they tried to fit that storyline, they tried to represent it well and give you a sense of different characters, of different elements within the songs. And I felt like that was such an important element in order for this record to really work at all levels, and in order for this record to really have a little bit more life, to have a little bit more of an aroma. I didn't want just a cookie cutter style approach from top to bottom, and that's not what they gave me. So I really appreciated that, and I really like the efforts that they had from a vocal perspective to make the record more dynamic, to give the record ebbs and flows, because there's certain songs on this album that feel super flat, super linear in terms of the sound that you're getting, because it's brutal, it's heavy, but it's really not changing from top to bottom. What's changing is the vocal approach, the vocal style, the vocal tones, and that is just enough to really make you feel like you're navigating slightly better through the record. Overall, I enjoy this album. I mean, this is a debut album. So for a debut record, there's a lot of great things about this album. There's a lot of great elements that they can take away from this record, build upon for future albums down the road. I want to see them define that heaviness slightly better in future records. I would like to see this album have a little bit more of a boundary, if you will, on what you want, a little bit more refined in some moments. There's some songs that really lack a little bit of definition. But overall, this is a very strong debut album, an album, like I said, that really lives off of the quality of the individual tracks, an album that has a lot to offer, that has a lot to give. And for the fans of deathcore, this is definitely an album that feels traditional in its sense, it feels traditional in its sound, but perhaps a little bit more diverse in the overall construction. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Behold the Creator. I love the drums and guitars on this track. They really offer a compact, heavy sound presence. Heaviness and aggression, those two elements working together really give that substance, they really give that aroma to the whole track. The vocals are a little bit more dynamic, they allow the song to become a little bit more interesting, they change the eyesight of the listener, but as far as the sound is concerned, it really stays on path with that heaviness that you're going to get out of the drums and the guitars. Next we have Defying the Gods, thunderous from the drums. They feel like this is a song that just thunderous all around. It really feels like an avalanche. It feels like as you progress through the track, while still moving very linear, there's a sense of growth, but the growth is a growth of heaviness, is a growth of aggression, a growth of intensity. It just feels like it's getting bigger and bigger as the song progresses. Very uncompromising track from start to finish. The vocals once again help give depth of experience to the track, which is a very important element for a track that overall feels very balanced and, like I said, very linear. The solo on this track really pops. I thought that was such an interesting element because it just felt different from everything that came up until that point and everything that comes after. So I just want to mention that I really like the solo on this track because it just felt different. It just made me pause for a second and go back and like, is this really what I'm listening to? That's always a great thing to do on a track when you really grab the attention of the listener, specifically if it feels like the listener is starting to digress or move away from the album itself. Last but not least, Night Intruders. I like the smooth opening of this song. It has more of an easing you into it. It's not brutality from the go, but once the song kicks in with the aggression, it really becomes an aggressive track all around. Once again, the drums offering a lot of power, a lot of heaviness. The bass on this track, you can really feel the impact that the bass has as far as sound is concerned, but also as far as the atmosphere that it gives. It has such a nice tone, it has such a nice touch that really gives a little bit of extra volume to the overall experience of the track. The guitars really drive it, they become the motor, if you will, of this song, and the vocals once again offering depth, offering a little bit of a larger platform in which you can build the song on, just really becoming more dynamic, coming alive, and allowing the song to feel more robust, more complete, if you will. This is it. This is Inhuman Architects with Paradox, their debut record, out July 16th on Vicious Instinct Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.